If you look at the sheer scale of modern conspiracy theories, fake news, and alternative facts, it's really easy to just assume the internet broke America's brain.
Right, yeah.
Like the narrative is usually that we had this perfectly functioning, rational society until social media algorithms came along and just kind of shattered our shared reality.
Which is a comforting thought, honestly.
It is. But I mean, what if this isn't a glitch? What if this intense blurring of reality and fiction is actually, the ultimate expression of the nation's DNA?
That is, well, the very provocative lens to view history through. And today we are unpacking some fascinating excerpts from Kurt Andersen's book, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire, a 500-year history.
Yeah.
And his core thesis here is that America was actually founded by wishful dreamers, magical thinkers, hucksters, and, true believers. So the current post-truth moment we're in, it's just the latest harvest of seeds that were planted centuries ago.
Okay, let's unpack this because for you, the listener, trying to stay well-informed in the landscape of just pure information overload understanding, this 500-year history, is really the ultimate shortcut.
Exactly.
It gives you the structural framework to make sense of a world that honestly often feels deeply irrational.
Yeah, and just to set the parameters of what we're actually analyzing today, Anderson traces a very specific, extreme brand of individualism as it collides with religious fervor and show business.
The ultimate American trio.
Right, exactly. We're observing how those three ingredients synthesize over 5 centuries. But to comprehend the historical roots, we really first have to measure the current temperature. We need to look at the modern Fantasyland census, so to speak.
Yes, and the statistics Anderson lays out to establish the scale of this issue are, they're bracing.
To say the least.
Taking data from comprehensive surveys over the last couple of decades, he calculates that less than half, maybe, as only a third of Americans, are solidly reality-based in the traditional empirical sense.
And before we get into the specific numbers, I think we need to make something very clear to the listener.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a quick caveat. We are impartially reporting the statistics and the beliefs outlined in the author's book.
Right. We're not taking a side on the climate change debate or the election or the vaccine debates.
Not at all. We're just using these as, source-provided examples to show how widely public beliefs diverge from institutional consensus. We're looking at the mechanics of belief today.
Precisely. We are not here to litigate the individual issues. So looking at the specific data points in the text, they really map out the topography of this landscape. According to the source, 2/3 of Americans believe angels and demons are actively operating in the world right now.
Wow. 2/3.
Yeah. And only a third believe global warming is real and human-caused, while another third believe it's a literal hoax orchestrated by scientists.
Right.
You also have a quarter of the population believing vaccines cause autism, and a quarter believing Donald Trump won the popular vote in the 2016 election.
It's just the fragmentation of reality is wild. And the mechanism of how this happens is what is truly fascinating here.
Definitely.
Anderson suggests that all these different domains of belief, they interact in a very specific way. He compares Fantasyland to the European Union.
Yes, the Schengen area analogy.
It operates as a Schengen area of belief. So wait, if it operates like the Schengen area, does that mean, like, if I buy into a massive government UFO cover-up, there's no psychological border control stopping me from wandering straight into believing, say, the Earth is flat, or that an apocalyptic doomsday is scheduled for next Tuesday?
That is the exact functional mechanism he's describing. The gate is just left open.
Wow.
Even if, say, the UFO believers view the doomsday preppers with total contempt.
Which they probably do.
Oh, they do. And the flat earthers think the cryptozoologists are absurd. But they still share a geographical space of unreality. Their fundamental commonality is this total rejection of the gatekeepers of consensus reality. So once you cross the border into Fantasyland, your passport is essentially valid everywhere within it.
I love that analogy. And the text also mentions a concept from science called the cocktail effect, where certain chemicals potentiate each other when mixed. Like, they don't just add up.
They multiply.
Exactly, they multiply. Americans have essentially been drinking a bottomless cocktail mixed from all these various fantasies.
Right.
You take anti-institutional conspiracy theories, you splash in some immersive virtual realities, hyper-detailed fantasy football leagues, add a dose of carefully curated online personas, and they all intensify the effects of one another.
Yeah, the unreality just builds on itself.
The lines blur until navigating the real world feels exactly like navigating a highly personalized movie set.
The patches of unreality take up more and more space until the whole lawn is astroturf.
I mean, that's such a great way to put it.
But to understand who laid that astroturf, we can't just look at the last decade. We have to rewind exactly 500 years to the moment the concept of DIY truth was first invented.
Let's do it.
We have to look at 1517.
Okay, so we're in a provincial university town south of Berlin with a young theology professor named Martin Luther.
A very famous name.
Right. And he is observing the Catholic Church engaging in what is basically the ultimate monetization of salvation, the selling of indulgences. You drop a coin in the chest, your deceased relative gets out of purgatory early.
It was a very lucrative business model. And alongside that financial machinery, the church was generating massive revenue through holy relics. And I mean, these were not subtle.
No, they were not.
The text notes they displayed straw purportedly from baby Jesus' manger, vials of Mary's breast milk, and hair from adult Jesus' beard.
Wait, Mary's breast milk?
Yes, literally sold as a physical relic. It was an entire economy built on fantastical merchandising.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So Luther writes his 95 Theses calling this out and nails it to the church door.
What's fascinating here is the collision of timing and technology.
Oh, the printing press.
Exactly. If Luther had protested, say, 50 years earlier, he likely would have just been burned at the stake and forgotten as a localized heretic.
All right, just another guy causing trouble.
But 1517 places him immediately after the introduction of the first mass distribution engine for decentralized thought, the printing press.
It went viral.
It did.
Mm.
His manifesto was translated, printed, and distributed all across Europe. Just 60 years after Gutenberg, there were 20 million books in circulation, mostly Bibles.
But wait, let me push back on Andersen's framing here for a second. Because Luther is debunking fake relics and calling out corrupt financial schemes, he's literally saying, that is definitely not Mary's breast milk.
Right.
So wasn't Luther actually striking a massive blow for logic and reason? How does demanding proof of relics lead us directly to unreason and, Fantasyland?
It sounds like a total paradox, I know.
Yeah.
But it comes down to the epistemological shift that Luther engineered.
Mm.
He was not replacing blind faith with the empirical scientific method.
Okay.
He was moving the ultimate authority of truth from an external institution to an internal feeling.
I see.
By translating the Bible into the vernacular and insisting that clergymen had no special access to the divine, he argued the pure, passionate, subjective belief was the only prerequisite for being a good Christian. Not deeds, not institutional rules.
So he essentially argued that truth isn't something handed down by an authority, it's something you feel inside yourself. Like, I believe this interpretation, therefore I am right.
Yes, and that is the death of the gatekeepers. The Catholic Church was disintermediated. The individual's subjective feeling of belief became the highest authority.
Wow.
It was the ultimate decentralization of truth. It created a framework where any person could be their own pope.
Okay, so taking this newfound radical decentralization of truth, millions of people eventually packed that exact operating system onto ships heading across the Atlantic to a blank slate.
The New World.
Right, but they weren't just sailing with religious visions. They were sailing with intense secular fantasies of instant, impossible wealth. Which brings us to the original vaporware, the gold seekers and Jamestown.
Yeah, we really have to understand the geopolitical envy of the era. By the 1500s and 1600s, the Spanish had already conquered Mexico and South America, and they discovered genuine, civilization-altering amounts of real gold with the Aztec and Inca empires.
Which triggered historic FOMO.
Massive fear of missing out among the English.
The logic was so simplistic but incredibly intoxicating. Like, if the Spanish found gold in the southern part of the New World, North America must be absolutely paved with it.
Just lying on the ground.
Yeah, all you had to do was show up with a shovel.
And to finance these expeditions, an entire industry of 16th century hype men emerged. Figures like Richard Hakluyt and Walter Raleigh acted as promoters.
It's the original marketing bros.
Completely. They drafted breathless reports based entirely on third-hand rumors and wishful thinking. They promised investors a literal paradise.
Didn't they try to prove the Garden of Eden was there?
Yes. They even used convoluted biblical math to calculate that the actual Garden of Eden was located at exactly 35 degrees north latitude.
Which, incredibly conveniently for their investment pitch, placed Eden right in the middle of Virginia.
Fund our ships, we are sailing straight to the Garden of Eden.
I mean, it is the exact historical equivalent of a disastrous modern tech startup selling vaporware.
It really is.
The investors back in London demanded an immediate return. The 1606 Jamestown Charter didn't order the colonists to, build a sustainable agricultural community. It literally commanded them to dig, mine, and search for all manner of mines of gold.
And the reality they encountered was brutal because they found iron pyrite.
Fool's gold.
Fool's gold. They loaded entire ships with shiny, worthless rocks. And rather than planting crops to survive the winter, they just kept digging.
Because they were so sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source points out that 2/3 of those early colonists starved to death, just clinging to a fantasy.
God, that's dark. And Andersen quotes the historian Daniel Boorstin here, who suggests that American civilization was shaped by a kind of natural selection. A natural selection of people who were willing to believe in advertising.
Which is a brilliant observation.
Well, wait, let's sit with that for a second. We usually think of natural selection favoring the strongest or the most adaptable. But Andersen is arguing that early America literally bred a population genetically and culturally optimized for susceptibility to marketing.
Well, look at the contrasting evidence in the text.
Mm.
You had pragmatic colonists like those in the Plymouth Company who landed in Maine.
Okay.
They looked around, realized there was no gold, no Northwest Passage to Asia,
Right.
and no exotic spices.
Right.
And they accepted the empirical reality. They cut their losses, packed up, and went back to England. The realists abandoned the experiment. The people who stayed, who endured starvation to keep digging for fool's gold, were the wide-eyed dreamers.
The true believers.
The true believers, the suckers and the hucksters.
So while desperate people were starving in Virginia, holding rocks they wished were gold back in London, a philosopher was perfectly documenting the exact psychological glitch keeping them in the dirt.
Ah, Francis Bacon.
Yes.
Writing in 1620, he formulated a brilliant observation about confirmation bias. He noted that the human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, draws all things else to support and agree with it.
Even ignoring evidence to the contrary.
Exactly. He saw that people will actively ignore or suppress that contrary evidence just to keep their adopted conclusions inviolate.
And in the context of Jamestown, this wasn't just abstract stubbornness. I mean, when you have crossed an ocean, risked your life, and watched your friends starve based on an investment pitch, admitting you were duped is psychologically shattering.
It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy.
Right. Bacon was observing cognitive dissonance in real time. For those colonists, confirmation bias was a psychological survival mechanism to justify their immense suffering.
And Bacon recognized that the colonization project was driven by delusion and profit, not pious truth.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you take that 17th century DNA, the intense confirmation bias, the rejection of institutional gatekeepers, the willingness to literally starve for a fantasy, and you fast forward to the modern era, you hit two massive cultural catalysts that just pour gasoline on this smoldering fire.
Andersen identifies the first catalyst as the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s.
Okay.
Because prior to this, the mid-20th century actually possessed a fairly rigid, centralized consensus reality. You had 3 major television networks, a high degree of trust in institutions, and a generally agreed-upon set of societal facts.
Right, the whole Walter Cronkite era.
Exactly. But the 1960s systematically dismantled that.
The counterculture introduced a new foundational rule to the American operating system. Basically, do your own thing, find your own reality, it's all relative.
Yes.
We saw the rise of the Eastland Institute, the New Age movement, and this active celebration of subjective experience over objective data.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 1960s rewired the American epistemology. Subjective truth, quote-unquote, my truth, was elevated above institutional truth.
Yeah.
But the 1960s alone didn't finalize Fantasyland. It required a second exponential catalyst to scale it globally.
The digital multiplier.
The internet age.
Because historically, if you harbored a completely unmoored crackpot theory, your reach was heavily limited to the people physically around you.
Right, you were just the eccentric person standing on a soapbox in the town square.
And everyone else just walked past. You were socially isolated.
The internet eradicated that isolation entirely. It weaponized that 1960s do-your-own-thing ethos by providing the infrastructure for unlimited confirmation bias.
Yeah, today, algorithmically, you are never alone. A person with the most obscure anti-empirical belief can instantly connect with thousands of fellow believers.
And they don't just find a community. They find beautifully produced documentaries, slickly designed websites, and synthesized data that provide really professional-looking facts to back up the delusion.
Because the architecture of the internet specifically rewards engagement, and nothing drives engagement like validating pre-existing biases.
Exact.
The lines between simulation and reality are now fundamentally porous. We live in an era of CGI where visual proof can be manufactured. We navigate online anonymity, where people construct entirely fictitious identities. We consume reality television, which scripts and edits human behavior to look spontaneous.
All a blur.
Right. Once a society becomes comfortable navigating that gray zone in entertainment and social interaction, making the jump to political and scientific unreality is seamless. The borders of the Schengen area are just thrown wide open.
The modern infrastructure is perfectly designed to support, validate, and monetize that historical American instinct to invent your own reality.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize this journey for you, the listener, the ultimate takeaway from Andersen's work is structural. Our current exhausting struggles with misinformation, polarization, truthiness, and information overload, they are not an anomaly.
Not at all.
We didn't suddenly break a perfectly functioning, rational machine. What we are experiencing is the hyperextension of America's founding DNA. It is a highly volatile mix of extreme individualism, anti-expert religious independence, and good old-fashioned hucksterism that has been simmering for 500 years.
And recognizing this 500-year through line is profoundly valuable for the listener. By understanding that we possess a natural historical bias toward wishful thinking and vaporware, you gain agency.
Yeah.
When you recognize the architecture of the Fantasyland casino, you don't have to play the games. Acknowledging our collective vulnerability to appealing fictions is really the essential first step to remaining grounded in the reality-based community.
It gives you a cognitive immunity to the hype. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own, building on everything we've just discussed.
Okay.
If the printing press sparked the 500-year era of DIY truth by letting anyone interpret the text, and the internet created the cocktail effect by letting anyone find a community of believers, what happens right now, today?
Oh.
We are watching generative AI become capable of creating alternate realities on the fly. It can generate customized video, synthesized audio, and photorealistic evidence that is utterly indistinguishable from the real world.
It's terrifying.
And crucially, it can be algorithmically tailored to exploit your exact personal biases. If our DNA already predisposes us to believe what we want to believe, what happens to society when a machine can flawlessly visually manifest our deepest wishes on a screen in real time?
We are standing on the edge of a completely new continent of unreality.
It really forces us to ask whether we'll keep digging for fool's gold or finally accept the empirical landscape for what it is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay grounded, and we'll see you next time.